Thanks, Cindy. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. So far we have 100 participants signing in from all around the country, which is pretty exciting for us. Today, our webinar is on dementia caregiving, which is a part of the series with Hearts and Hands, Dementia Caregiving Conversations. Again, like Cindy said, my name is Krishna Dalakia, and I usually host these webinars, and my role at CPG is that I'm the Senior Health Education Specialist, and I am in charge of health curriculum planning for conferences, courses, and presentations. I'm also the host of the new CPG podcast, Choose Well, which is a podcast focusing on well-being. Today, we're so excited to have the Reverend Jean Denton with us, who will be our subject matter expert, along with her panelist of experts. Jean is a native of Brooklyn, New York. She completed her bachelor's at Cornell University and her master's at Columbia University Teachers College. Jean has her certification as a spiritual director at Hayden Institute. After a career in nursing education and healthcare administration, her work moved to a focus on parish-based health ministry. She helped found National Episcopal Health Ministry and served as credo faculty. Later ordained as a priest, she served at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Indianapolis. Jean left her full-time parish ministry position to be present with her husband as he completed his 13-year struggle with younger onset Alzheimer's disease. Now retired, Jean lives in Claremont, California. She periodically serves as chaplain at Gladstone's Library in Wales. She wrote Good is the Flesh, Body, Soul, and Christian Faith, and her forthcoming book, Walking Each Other Home, Spiritual Companionship for Dementia Caregivers, will be offered by Church Publishing in the fall of this year. So we're so excited to have Jean with us, and I'm going to hand it off to Jean in just a moment, but I just want to repeat that this webinar will be recorded and posted on CPG's website shortly after the live webinar is over. And throughout the webinar, please feel free to enter in your questions that come up in the Q&A feature at the bottom panel of the webinar, Zoom webinar feature. Thank you, Jean. I'll hand it over to you.
And I thank you, Krishna, for your work in this and for your labors of love with so many to make this possible. I also want to say thank you to everyone who has chosen to be here today. I know it has taken time from your life. Though my husband has died from early onset dementia, I still identify as a dementia caregiver. I think it's because the experience is so powerful, because it made me ask questions that I actually didn't know I had, and caused me to learn things that I didn't really want to know. So I'm here as a presenter, not because I'm an expert, but because I've lived it, and because I have had some time to reflect, both as a parish nurse and as a priest, on these things. We're not going to be able to say this is how to be a very efficient caregiver. We're not going to give you a checklist, that would guarantee excellence. What we are going to do is step back from the dailiness of the care that is given and look at what happens to the heart and the soul of the caregiver. So I am going to, if I've got my technology correct, share my screen and start a slideshow. There we go. You are not alone. We're going to be looking at caring, what it is, who does it, and what it costs. I'll be sharing some ideas using this PowerPoint, and then we'll talk with some caregivers about their current experience, and then have a chance to respond to your questions. So where are we going with this time? I've got 4 objectives. The first sounds a little strange, but just 3 truisms about who we are as dementia caregivers. So much could be said. I'm picking up 3. I hope that you will have an enlarged sense of just what caring is, that you'll be able to articulate the one common issue that we all face as dementia caregivers, and that you'll be able to appreciate the cost of caregiving. 3 truisms. Well, here's the first. There are millions of us in the United States alone. Last count was about 16.2 million dementia caregivers. They may be the people down the block. They may be people in your hometown. You probably don't know them. You're going through a similar experience. You're walking a similar path. So how do you connect? There are a few places I would point you to. The Alzheimer's Association, to be sure, nationally and locally, the Family Caregiver Alliance, and your state's area agency on aging. Every state has one. That is a link there to how to find what's happening in your state, and you'll be having these offered to you at the end of the session if you don't catch them right now. A second truism is that we care for people who are marginalized by society. We don't have sexy celebrity jobs that anybody wants to talk about. We are in a society that, though it gives lip service to valuing caring, I think it's really pretty embarrassed by dementia and by adults who need care. Our loved ones are hidden and their lives undervalued in our society. And that means that our work is too. The third point I just want to hold up is that we have deeper spiritual needs as dementia caregivers that are so often unacknowledged, not because they don't matter, but because they take second place to the immediate pressing needs of changing adult diapers or finding someone who's been off wandering. But because we don't acknowledge them doesn't mean that they're not there. They won't go away, even though they're suppressed and maybe deferred. So, second objective, I hope we have an enlarged view of just what caring is. We use the word care as though everybody had the same definition. We could look to Oxford Dictionary to find a definition, but I prefer one that's given by Henri Nouwen. Caring is hard to define. Caring is lamenting, it's participating in suffering that may not be our personal body's suffering. Caring is to cry out with people who are ill or confused, lonely, isolated, forgotten. Caring is to enter into that world that another inhabits and establish a fellowship and be present and stay present, even when you can't change the situation. That is hard work. Caring is hard work. And I can't help but wonder if we as caregivers started to answer a question differently from the way it's so easy to answer. Somebody says, well, what are you doing with yourself these days? Easy to say, well, I'm caring for my husband. What would happen if we said instead, I'm being present with my husband who is ill, confused, lonely, isolated, and forgotten? Or what if we said, I'm trying to be present with Sally. She's in a world that looks different from mine, but I know it's real to her. I'm trying to figure it out. I want to be present with her and stay present with her. Honestly, I wonder if we wouldn't be doing a favor to society if we could educate them in this way. This is what caring is. I also wonder if we wouldn't the seeing ourselves and our work differently just because we claim the value of it. Another part of caring is that it's varied. It's varied by who does it. We have professional caregivers and we have what I'll call family caregivers. Professionals are usually called to do this work. There's some sense of vocation. Family caregivers never signed up for this piece. Professionals get paid for it, meagerly, but they get paid. Family caregivers are certainly unpaid, and it costs a lot of money to give care. Professionals have been educated for the job, and society gives them a certification of some sort. Yet family caregivers, maybe doing the very same tasks, have to do so with no prior experience. Nobody has ever screened them for doing it, yet they have to do it. Professionals have some kind of a formal relationship with a patient. It's even a title. This is a patient, I am a caregiver. This is a parishioner, I am a cleric. Yet informal or family caregivers have relationships that continue to morph. They're always changing. What was parent-child becomes flipped. What was lover now becomes caregiver, hands-on caregiver. Changing, undefined. A professional gets to walk away at the end of a shift, but a family caregiver is, in one way or another, on duty 24 hours every day and no weekends off. A professional has a job description someplace, some policies, some procedures to follow. A family caregiver has no job description except do what needs to be done. Caring is varied not just by who does it, but by what is done. Think of the difference between what is done at the early stage of a disease and the late stage of a disease. Early in a dementia, it might be caring when we take someone to the grocery store and help them choose the food. At a late stage, it might be putting that food on a spoon and putting it in a mouth. It varies tremendously. It's ever-changing. Caring also has phases, and I think it's important to talk about what Joan Tronto puts forth here. She says, one phase is caring about something. Caring about, it's a very big kind of caring. It's recognizing that a need exists and deciding to do something about it. It's the Alzheimer's Association coming into being. It's powerful and it's generous. Another phase is taking care of business. When someone assumes responsibility for a particular need. An example is my husband's son, Tim, paid a lot of money for a wheelchair for his 6'2", 200-pound father who was 2,000 miles away. He was taking care of things. It's highly regarded to do this kind of caring by society, and maybe because men may have a little more money than women traditionally, it's often something men get to do. Then there's caregiving. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road. I think it's the kind of caregiving that you are doing and I have been doing. It's hands-on work. It's traditionally women's work. It's called a pink job. This kind of caring is certainly gendered. And then there's this care receiving, the person who accepts care from another. Goodness, society doesn't think much of care receiving. We look as a society at people who need care as being weak or helpless, and maybe even pitiable. Don't you wonder what it means to someone's self-respect and dignity to be pitied? Caring in our society is also private and invisible. It is not seen as a social responsibility, at least not yet. It's to be provided by the household. And only if the household can't cover something does the market life enter in. Consider how America handles childcare, for example. A mother is supposed to care for her children, and only if she cannot does she need on her own to find care and pay for it out of pocket. We don't have a formal daycare policy in our country. And think about healthcare, hospital or long-term care. You have to get it yourself. This insurance business, you have to pay for it or be independently wealthy or spend down money that you've long saved in order to qualify for Medicaid. And caring is motivated. This is from a study by a nurse, Suzanne Cahill. She was talking to women, finding out what motivates care. She comes up with these 5 basic big categories. And I think a lot of things, I think she covers just about everything in them. Love certainly motivates, but so does obligation, feeling I have to, I ought to, or maybe it's a sense of duty offered by society at large. Maybe it's a commitment that is done, made, maybe for a spiritual calling, or maybe it's out of guilt that we do what we do. Motivation is impacted by many things. I think one that's so curious is that geography impacts it. Which of the siblings lives near mom and therefore becomes the point person just because of where they live? Cultural expectations. Some parts of our society are much more generous and look at a collective caregiving, and others look at a very individual approach to caregiving. And then there's cost. My goodness, who can come up with $7,000 to $8,000 every month to pay to have somebody else give the care that you'd prefer to be giving on your own anyway? But think about the feelings that come and influence motivation. Feelings, fatigue, total exhaustion, maybe resentment. These all impact what motivates us to love, to do what we do. And our motivation is a mixed bag. I just want to underline that. It's always a mixed bag. It can't not be a mixed bag. We'll have feelings that we like and feelings that we don't like, but they're all going to be there. None of these feelings is wrong. They may be unpleasant, but they're just feelings. They are not us. We're motivated by many things. So caring is hard to define. It varies by who does what. It has phases. It's private. It's invisible. It's motivated. And you caregivers are negotiating this, navigating this every single day. I want to say bravo. A moment to look at the common issue that we face. Put very succinctly, the one for whom we care has an altered view of reality due to brain disease. Altered view. That doesn't mean an imagined view. It is real. The person who has dementia sees the world differently, experiences the world differently. Hard to get into that world, but necessary if we're going to give care that helps the loved one and keeps us in our own reality simultaneously. And this altered view of reality is due to brain disease. Oh, I long for the day when we can use that term. We talk about kidney disease, we talk about heart disease, and there's no shame in it. Why do we attach so much stigma to brain disease? The one for whom we care, who has this altered view of reality due to a brain disease has memory issues, because these brain diseases eventually affect memory. We act as though memory is one thing, or that a memory is in one place in our brains. It's not. There are many kinds of memory. If you take away nothing from this webinar today, take away the name Jennifer Gent Fuller. She wrote Thoughtful Dementia Care. She's self-published. She's a Canadian nurse who is now retired. And her little book is a bestseller on Amazon when you're looking for dementia care. She is practical, but she's also coming at it from a well articulated scientific perspective, and is ever so helpful in looking at memory and how we deal with it when it's lost. And then last, I want to spend a little time looking at what it costs to give care. We're giving a precious and very expensive gift to our loved one, to society, maybe to something bigger than that as well. But it is a cost. It costs us physically in terms of morbidity, or what makes us sick. We have a whole lot more chronic illness, especially heart disease, broken hearts maybe. We have a whole lot more failure to take care of ourselves with preventive measures. In terms of our morbidity, I hate to say it, but it's true, at least by 2 scientific studies, that just feeling the stress of caregiving is an independent factor in premature dying for elderly spousal caregivers. It costs us socially. Just 2 things here I could mention financially. You know, dementia caregivers give to society every year in America $244 billion worth of care for free. Yet, dementia caregivers are twice as strapped financially as other long-term caregivers. 60% of caregivers work, try to balance all the responsibilities. Yet 2/3 of those who work have had to miss work. 30% have had to cut back hours. 8% have had to forego promotions that would have meant a big difference in terms of pension, maybe. So it costs socially that way. It also costs in terms of isolation, giving up hobbies, giving up going to church, feeling the need to restrict who can come into the house because of some behavior issues that our loved one is putting forth. There's a tremendous isolation, and all of that was before the horrors of COVID. It costs us psychologically. Some studies say that up to 40% of dementia caregivers have, dementia caregivers have depression. I think it depends on how you're going to be measuring that. But depression's real. It escalates as it gets near time to start living apart from each other. Our nursing home placement, it really peaks at placement and lasts significantly for 6 months afterwards. Psychologically too, we have to deal with identity issues. Who am I? I used to be part of a couple. I used to be something else. Who am I now? It costs us because we have to live with a continuous ambiguity. It's almost as though, who am I going to wake up to this morning? You know, somebody who can be functional or has less function or has new insight that is hard to communicate. And I think it also costs us spiritually. And the priest in me has to say, I think it causes us to grow when we can step back and look at that. But it costs us. We had a view of who God was, but now we see a God who lets hallucinations that nobody can control happen to innocent people. We see suffering happen in deep ways we see and question why. We might wonder about this God who protects the faithful. We come up with new answers, of course, but it's hard to go through. And of course, there are those things that have some spiritual overtones, shall I say? What about the little white lies that we wind up telling? What about our feelings of anger or guilt? What about faithfulness in this situation? It costs a lot to give the kind of care that we give. So each night, I want you caregivers, before you go to bed, to look at yourself, to be present to yourself. Look in the mirror and know on many levels that you are an exceptional person just because you care. There are things happening to you as well as to your loved one. You have needs and questions and feelings that are just as valid and just as in need of attention. You are loving your neighbor. You're loving your loved one, but you're not to do it instead of yourself, but as yourself. You're doing excellent work, whatever that work of caring is, but you're still not the Messiah. You still didn't cause the disease and you still can't cure it. And you're not alone. From that, I want to move us into talking with some current caregivers. So I'm going to ask Shelley and Suzanne if they would please unmute, and I'll figure out how to stop sharing my pause. So I'm going to ask a few questions. And Shelley, I'm going to dare to ask you to start. You give care on so many levels in so many ways. I don't know how you do it. I wonder how you balance all of that caregiving. Can you tell us?
Yes, Jane, thanks. It's a challenge, especially because oftentimes there's just not enough time to do everything. And so sometimes I'm a perfectionist, so sometimes I have to accept that things are not going to be perfect, that I give what I can, and just try to do my best. It's definitely a challenge at times to maintain balance.
And so many times our perfectionism helps us, but boy, it sure can get in the way, isn't it? You know, when is enough enough?
Right. Another thing, it really helps with friends. Like if you have friends have been very helpful to kind of be there. And I've always had trouble asking for help. I'm very independent, I'm capable, and so I've never, I guess, utilized or exercised the help muscle. But when you're caring for essentially two people and working full time, you just can't do it all. And so I had to start asking for help, and people want to help. They want to help, but sometimes you have to tell them exactly what you need. And that was very difficult as well.
Maybe we'll get to that piece again. I think it's really important to look at how do we ask for help? How can we ask for help when we're so independent minded? Suzanne, I want to move to you for a minute. You have retired from being a geriatric social worker. So you've cared professionally for a lot of people over a lot of years, but now it's gotten down to the personal. And you've told me a story of when your loved one was first put into a different living arrangement from you, how you had to advocate, which is a kind of caring that many of us haven't had to really get into. Could you tell us a story?
Well, my loved one went into nursing home just 3 weeks before COVID. And of course, we're told when a person goes into nursing care that you need to be involved, the family needs to be involved, and that someone needs to have something from home to remind them of home. He was in a very small room, so we couldn't bring a chair or his dresser because they were both too big. So that was okay. Then he was moved to a larger room, and I was told no, he couldn't have his chair. And I said, isn't there room? Yes, but it just wouldn't be safe. And I asked all the levels of care people for help to allow him to do this. I asked for them to allow me to see this evaluation, since they said he couldn't do things. And they said, well, you haven't seen him except through a window, so you don't really know. I said, well, put it on a telephone and let me see. No, they couldn't do that. They were too busy. I waited for answers for about 6 weeks, and I finally called the long-term care ombudsman. Now, this I normally would think of as somebody to call for abuse, neglect, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, I'll just call with this small problem. And do you know, after talking to this person for an hour, telling him the situation, 2 hours later, I got a call from the administration. Oh, we'll bring the chair over and we'll do an evaluation on a telephone tomorrow. So it shows, even if they're in a nursing facility, you still may have to advocate, especially during this COVID time.
Yeah. Yeah. You get to be the voice, don't you, for what needs to be given. I really commend you on taking that bull by the horns, because I think some of us in caregiving think it's a quiet, gentle background thing. And it's pretty bold to call the state ombudsman to get some help. But I really am glad you told that story, because I think it may empower some other people to call on resources to get some help. Shelley, you talked about how asking for help was hard. Can you say any more about that? I think again, your story had to do with, because your loved one's dementia is an atypical kind. It's not the traditional senile dementia that we've heard about. People saw her behavior and thought, that's not dementia, and maybe pulled away a little bit. And you yet had to pull them in. Speak to that for us.
My loved one, a lot of people didn't really see that there was anything wrong. And so, I did, have to turn to friends, but, also any other type of resources that were available through the city, or, working with the bus to get, her able to ride the bus to appointments when I couldn't get off of work at certain times. But sometimes it just takes getting creative also with who you're gonna reach out to.
And you said something about being specific sometimes. Something that helped me was just having a little list of things that I needed to get done that maybe somebody else could do. I didn't have to be the one going to the grocery store.
Absolutely. That's a big one. Hey, do you mind bringing me dinner? Or, I really could use some milk the next time you go to the store. Would you mind? And people really, really do like the opportunity to help. And a lot of people, since they don't know exactly what to do, it really is good to be able to specify.
Yeah. Yeah. Suzanne, I'm going to go to you again. I think you told me a story about sending out a Christmas letter. Lots of people that you've known for years. Yet this letter, you said something different. Can you tell us about what happened?
Well, over the years, I've shared problems as well as joys on my Christmas letter. And these are some people that I don't keep in contact with often, maybe 2 or 3 times a year at the most. And this year I told about the dementia and the having to be in a nursing facility of my loved one. And I was amazed that several people contacted me shortly after they got that letter and said, I've been caring for a spouse or a parent or someone with Alzheimer's or dementia of some type for many years, some of them since 2012, 2015. I never knew it. So we've been in contact, and I think it helps to talk to each other about it.
I'm always fascinated by our society's difficulty acknowledging brain disease and why it is so hidden. I don't know, has that, well, that's just one of my things. It is hidden and it does cost. I'm wondering, Shelley, Suzanne, could you say anything about what it has cost you to be caregivers? I don't mean just dollars and cents, but to who you are. And if there are things that you find compensating for that, or how you've compensated for some of that, are there any good parts to this?
So I can speak to the fact that before this, I never really had encountered a whole lot of problems in my life. I was blessed, I think, and had a very carefree, happy existence. And through this, the amount of stress and troubleshooting, constant troubleshooting, really has cost me in health. It's changed my outlook on life to the point of, really thinking about setting setting things in place to make sure that if I'm gone, which is a real possibility, that my son will be taken care of. Because, like, as you said, the cost to your health, often there's a lot of caregivers that don't outlive the person they're caring for. And I was very aware of that. And so it does really impact health wise and mental health wise. But on the other side, for myself, I feel like it's not something I would have chosen, but I feel like it's something that I'm supposed to do, and a journey that I'm helping my loved one through is a very personal journey. And I think that there's a level of experience and wiseness that I can help others through now, that the only way you can get that is through living it. So it's painful, but you can't sharpen a sword without beating the dickens out of it. So so I think that would be the silver lining on this.
Thank you. Suzanne, do you find some benefit in all of this caregiving?
Well, I cared for my mother-in-law who had dementia. Both my spouse and I were only children, so we had our both responsibilities for our mothers. So I had an earlier experience with dementia, living with it. And it has really cost me physically, I think, more than anything else, and maybe psychologically too. But my children, our children, are the ones that said to just really put the the screws to me and said, you need to do something because you are too tired. You are lifting that wheelchair for too many years, and it's showing on you. And we want you to be around as well as him. So that was probably what pushed me over with the nursing care, which was a very difficult decision.
Very difficult. Very, very difficult. I know too. And it pushed you to realizing that you couldn't do this alone.
That's right.
That you are not alone, that there is help somewhere if we dare to acknowledge our mortality, our mere mortalness, and do it. I'd like to know if, again, from both of you, is there one thing you would want to tell dementia caregivers? One thing you would want them to hear from you, a word of maybe encouragement or a little bit of advice?
One thing that I would highly encourage is if you're going through this with your loved one, is to talk. And whether that's talking to a counselor, talking to a friend, talking to a support group. I didn't have time for support groups to actually go to one, but I found some on Facebook that were targeted specifically for, specifically for FTD and specifically for people raising small children while also being a caregiver. And so that was huge for me to develop a village, so to speak, of people who totally understood. So I would recommend, it's probably one of the biggest, is seek out your support.
That's right.
Build your community. You are not alone. I see Krishna is back with us, and I bet she's taking some questions from the listeners today. So let's hear.
Yes, I am. Thank you. This has been wonderful to listen in, and I'll just share a comment from one of our participants saying, thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Suzanne. I see myself and my ongoing experience mirrored in you. I can only believe that others also do. Thank you so much for coming forward and speaking about where you are in this journey. I acknowledge and salute across the forest. You have my utmost respect and honor. And so I thought that was important to share because a lot of the questions that are coming in are very related to some of the content that you've covered so far and the experiences that you've shared. So one of the first questions that came in was, what are the spiritual practices that work for caregivers that clergy can support caregivers to exercise?
I'll start with that, if I may. And while I'm doing it, encourage people to come to the third webinar because we're really going to look at spiritual practices there. I think mindfulness is something that's incredibly important. Instead of feeling while you're changing somebody's clothes for the third time that day, instead of holding on to what, oh, this shouldn't be happening, or maybe someday this will stop happening. Stay in the moment. Feel what that warm washcloth feels like when you clean somebody up. Notice colors changing. I mean, if it comes down to that, but trying to stay in the moment. And maybe having some affirmations, some prayer, some short prayer that can focus a caregiver in the midst of the myriad of things, something to hold on to. I don't know, let me ask Suzanne and Shelley, do you have anything that you would call your spiritual practices that fit this?
I think
I found that I was not listening to, prayer, I think, is a two-way. You pray, but you need to listen to the response. And I never had time to listen when I was a caregiver. And now I have more of that time.
And maybe that speaks to taking time for yourself as a caregiver. So many times we feel guilty. We feel that we're being selfish because we are taking time to be fed. I think if we can encourage folks to know that, you know, one of the classic books out there now is Put on Your Oxygen First. You need to be fed before you're going to feed anybody else. And it's not selfish. Shelley, any thoughts from you?
absolutely. And to your point, as far as taking time for yourself and not feeling bad about it, it's hard to practice, but you're absolutely right, because if you don't take time for yourself, you're not going to be good for anybody else. And I've had to compartmentalize work time, home time, caregiving time, and me time, and try to stick to not blurring the lines so much and not feeling obligated to overextend in areas that I used to work more than I should, or etc. You have to kind of segment things off.
And I think, Shelley, what you say segues really nicely into some comments that I'm seeing in the chat, basically focusing around what you said, self-care for the caregiver. And some of the comments are talking about this caring for their loved one, and then also the people around them, their support group, not supporting them to a point where they feel like it is enough for them, and finding other avenues to get support, like seeing a therapist. Someone had also asked a question, how, while caring for their parents who are, one of them has Alzheimer's, how she can take care of herself in the midst of a pandemic, especially dealing with this immense amount of uncertainty that comes with caregiving, but also layering on the uncertainty of living in a pandemic.
You know, I want to just mention one book that I think speaks to that. You may be familiar with the name Pauline Boss. She wrote about ambiguous loss, the importance of dealing with somebody's here but not here. Her second book to this is called Loving Someone Who Has Dementia. And she speaks to this business of we can be present to each other and maybe a spiritual, maybe psychological level, but when we can't be there physically, how do we handle that? How do we negotiate that? There was an article maybe some of you saw in the New York Times on Sunday looking at what dementia care, how it has been impacted by COVID. It is a powerful, powerful article. And there are no simple answers. No simple answers.
Okay. And someone did ask this question. Could you repeat the author of the Canadian author that you mentioned earlier?
It's Jennifer Gent-Fuller, Gent-Fuller. And I've recommended it to several people and have heard how much it has benefited them. It's not expensive, but it's precious.
I just realized I was muted. Okay. I think this is a simple question, but a very powerful question. How do you help people like your neighbors who wouldn't talk to your loved one learn ways to include them? So how do you include others that are part of your community? How do you teach them how to acknowledge your loved one that is going through dementia?
My quick answer would be model it. Show them what it means to include someone who's not thinking or having the same reality you do. Don't run away. Show people what it's like. I'm remembering when my husband was diagnosed, he was a normal patient before we went into the doctor's office who said that, gee, you've got cognitive impairment prodromal to dementia. The doctor for the first time started looking just at me and excluding Tom as though he didn't exist. Well, I got my ire up and I looked at Tom for his answers, and I made the doctor wait for Tom to come up with his answers. I think modeling is about all we can do. Shelley, Suzanne, any other ideas on that?
Absolutely. That really is the best way, and shows compassion and reverence for that individual. Their soul is still there. They are not, they're compromised, but they're not less than. And so, you know, I think that just maybe explaining also if they don't understand how that, you know, why your loved one may be eating off the serving spoon in a buffet, for instance, and just keep their dignity as much as possible. And if you react to things like that in a compassionate way, then it helps others know.
Encouraging people to speak to the person in the present rather than in the past. Really being in the present with them.
Yeah.
Maybe in the early stages, thinking about things that you used to do a long time ago together, if you had that in common. But really being in the present with the person.
Thank you, Suzanne. And someone just put into the chat, which I think is a really great follow-up answer to this question. Remind others who have interaction with your loved one that when he or she may react sharply or impetuously, that it is not about them, and ask them how important it is for them to not react to them. Stay quiet, help the person who is feeling attacked, that it is the one of the few ways the person can express his or her frustration. I thought that was a very powerful thing to say. And I think this is the last question that we have time for today. We have a lot of questions that have come in, and I want to thank everyone that has taken the time to do that. So for this last question, what are things that people who are your support group have done for you that you have appreciated? Some ideas for those of us who want to care for the caregiver. And I think that's a nice way to end this first part of the 3-part series.
I want to just share one example. I was getting depressed. I was overwhelmed. And a friend said to me, Jean, have you thought about taking family leave time? It's like, I didn't even think about that. But to have somebody speak their truth about what they were seeing in me was so valuable. Speak the truth. Others?
For me, one of the best things that happens as far as help goes is if a friend says, do you mind if I pick your son up from school and take him to the library? Or do you mind if I bring you dinner Wednesday? Or, I have an extra one of these. Can I bring it by? And I don't have to think of what to ask for, and it's very helpful. And so that has been super helpful for me.
I think just talking with friends and letting go of my frustrations was the most helpful, and having them really listen, not judge, not have to respond, but just listen.
Bravo. Thank you. And thank you, Krishna, for navigating what I think were probably many questions. Appreciate it.
Yes, many questions.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of tie some things up. It's just my hope that we accomplish the little bit that we were trying to accomplish, reminding you that you're not alone, that there is help available, though nobody can make your experience any different from your unique experience, that you're going to have feelings, some of which may feel pretty unpleasant, but they're yours, they're there. They don't all have to be acted on, but to acknowledge them and pay attention to them matters a lot. I hope that you'll be able to articulate, maybe a little bit better, just what it is that you do when you are giving care. That is not, I'm taking care of my mother, but some of the specifics. And I guess mostly I hope that you recognize the value of what you're doing, even if society can't see it yet. What you're doing and giving as a very precious and very expensive gift matters. I want to go back to my screen sharing here. And again, remind you that each night before you go to bed, look at yourself, see the value of who you are and what you are doing. Some resources to pay attention to. Let's see, I'm not getting my forward here. What can I do? Let me try something, folks. I'm not getting there. Oh my, Krishna, I'm going to lean to you. Can you tell us where people are going to have access
Yes,
to resources?
yes, no problem. Well, I think this is such a lovely quote to end on. Oh, and it's just a little delayed. Look at that.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just go through some of these briefly. The first, the Alzheimer's Association is great. One of the things they put out every year is, not a sexy name, facts and figures, but it's information both about dementias, not just Alzheimer's disease, about caregivers, about progress, about research. It's valuable. Then the next several there are all my current hero, Jennifer Gant Fuller. I wish she wrote when I was giving care. Both her book and the fact that if you just Google her online, you'll find some of what she has written for free, 27 pages worth, and also some talks that she's given. And then at the end there, I get to share thoughts through a book that's coming out by Morehouse Church Publishing Group in the fall, walking each other home, spiritual companionship, and we get into some spiritual practices there. Again, the resources that you can have to help you build your community, please remember them and use them. Alzheimer's Association and the support groups that they can help facilitate. Family Caregiver Alliance does the same. Lots of hints, lots of practical stuff too. And then also being in touch with your area agency on aging. Get some names, get some faces. Know indeed that you're not alone. And then there are some resources that the Church Pension Group itself has available. Krishna, could you speak to those?
Yes, I will. And I just also wanted to mention to our audience that is still on that in your chat feature, there will be a PDF attachment of the resources that that Jean had gone over, and that we do have our next part of the series, A Peculiar Kind of Grief, on March 25th. So please be sure to register for that. We do have an e-learning course on cpg.org that specifically focuses on dementia caregiving. So if you would find that, if you think that would be something of interest or helpful for you, please do take a look at that. This webinar will be recorded and posted on cpg.org shortly. As soon as this webinar ends, you will receive a survey. Please take some time to fill out the survey, and that really just helps us plan these webinars, and we take what you say very seriously. So please do take some time to do that. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Jean again, and Suzanne and Shelley for taking the time to be with us today and share your experience. I particularly found it very helpful, so thank you. And thank you for our participants for signing in. We'll see you at the next one.